Good afternoon, everyone. We are back in DHL Transportation Forum 2021. For those who are just joining us, let me tell you, you missed out on two spectacular presentations, but don't worry about it. There is still a lot of interesting content, and we loved having you with us. This is Sergio Morales, Business Developer Director in DHL. I am excited to share with you our next panel called the Economics in Mexico and Latin America. And like in the previous sessions, I have my dearest Claudia here with us.
Hello, Serge. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Claudia Marquez. I am a Senior Management of Solution Design for DHL Supply in Mexico. Welcome to the second panel in our first day of our DHL Transportation Forum. We would like to tell you that this event is being carried out in three different languages. You can select the audio in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. For that, you can just click the audio of your preference in your screen.
Likewise, we would like to tell you that the agenda will still be available in the website where you registered.
And once again, we invite you to share in social media this experience with photos of this event, with your comments, or also with your perspective on what will logistics will bring for the future. All opinions are welcomed. We recommend that you add the hashtag DHLTEF 2021 in your posts so we can keep on with the conversation, and also to consider them and share them with the world.
And there is no doubt that the times today are quite challenging and changing as well. That is the reason why having an economic perspective of Mexico and Latin America is paramount in order to make informed decisions, prepare yourselves for the short, middle, and long term. For the following 90 minutes, we will hear from some of the benchmark voices who will be sharing with us the vision.
To start with this panel, I will welcome Valeria Mound, who is CEO of the Mexican Institute for Competitivity. Previously, she was also president of another organization of politics in Mexico. She is economist in Mexico with a master's degree in London School of Economics and also worked for the bank industry. She has also been a researcher for Harvard University. She writes columns every week for the Universal, and she works frequently as an analyst in media. She has been named also by Forbes magazine like one of the 100 most powerful women in Mexico. Welcome, Valeria.
And with Valeria, the panel we will have Dr. Gabriel Casillas, General Joint Director of Economic Analysis and Relationship with Investors of Banorte Group. He worked at the Mexican bank for over 10 years in the position of economic research, central banking operations, and risk management. He is a member of the select group of the leaders of the future by the Institute of Finances, and he is the president of economic research of IMEF. Dr. Gabriel Casillas is an economist from the Tecnológico de Monterrey, and he got his PhD in the Texas University with a specialization in econometrics, currency theory, and economics and information. Welcome, Gabriel. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Juan Carlos Aderman. And thank you very much, Claudia. It is an honor to be here with you, Valeria, sharing this panel. And I want to thank DHL. Thank you, Sergio.
And finally, to the moderator of this panel will be Manuel Uribe, who is Finance Director in DHL Supply Chain Mexico. Welcome, Manuel. Thank you. It's very nice to say hi to all you in this transportation forum. And once again, we invite you to share your questions in the chat that you have on screen just underneath this broadcast. So please use this space only for your questions and write the word question so we can identify them faster. Now we'll start with this very interesting panel.
Well, we are ready to get started, and we will start with a presentation put together by Valeria. Besides the long trajectory she has, I would like to add that she is an absolute opinion leader. Do follow her. So the floor is yours, Valeria.
Thank you very much, everyone, for having me, inviting me. Thank you, DHL. I am very glad to participate in this forum, and we'll talk later on with the presentation, but the transport industry is one of the industries that's more likely to be well, to be flexible, and it is very interconnected to what's going on now. And of course it has its own challenges, and because of course they are there, but with this broad name of strategy, like where are we going to, and we will talk where are we really heading to, but that depends on where do we need or where do we want to head to. So we'll start with some figures that show us not where are we going to, but where are we at. So, what has the past left us now, and how is the economic history in Mexico in some key points? And from there, it will be very interesting to wonder where do we need to go now? And with the economic growth of the last year, I have chosen just from 2000 to 2021, and you can have the numbers you want. You can have your data to 1900, be no further back in the past because it's very hard to know how economic growth has been then. But we will take a look of the last 21 years. And as you can see, Mexico's economic growth has some fluctuations, which are interesting. And what's the most important is the drop down that we have on 2020, because it was one of the most important not only in Mexico's recent history, but in Mexico history just like that. It was such a downfall that has no parallel in history. The closest was in 1932. And back in 1932, we didn't have the gross domestic product. So it was just something that we were considering, that supposedly, with the data we have available, that in 1932 economy dropped more than 14%. And since that big downfall that we had in 1932, which of course we were a very different country back then, we have a 2020s with a drop down of 8.5 or 8.2 depending on the sources that we use, but it shows the magnitude of this downfall. We haven't seen anybody who is alive in the planet has ever experienced such a downfall. We have seen, yes, important downfalls in economic activity in Mexico. I think we all remember 1994 and 1995, where we had a big clash, and that crisis, of course, was lived like a homemade crisis somehow. You couldn't just turn your head to blame somebody. There was no other something to blame, no other country. In that moment, we had just an imbalance of our payments that in the end ended up in a very huge problem with a huge downfall, and that was only 6.3%. And of course, that downfall in 1995 was accompanied by inflation. And inflation, I think, is one of these variables that we all live in our daily lives. Regardless if we understand or not economics or understand definitions, inflation, we understand that. Because when you go to the supermarket and something costs more, we all know it's inflation. And back in 1995, we had this phenomena, and it was felt much harder because of the inflation. 1995 was a year that changed the structure of Mexico, not only because of the downfall, but also because of the TLC agreement, and that changed the structure of the country. 1995 is not so far away as 1932, as I was mentioning, but from 95 to 2021, we are a completely different country. This integration in economics that we have today was something that was just building up in 1995, but that maybe we couldn't foresee the magnitude that it would bring. So economic in transportation industry is fundamental, because we can say that we cannot understand the development of this industry if we wouldn't be so interconnected as we are with North America's productive chains. So let's go back to our graph, and let's focus in the downfall in 2009. It was an international crisis, a very important one, of course, in the Mexican economy, but somehow we didn't feel it as much, and maybe that was in some sectors because it was just specifically the impact was specific in the financial industry where things turned the table. And when you looked at that crisis, you were like, okay, that's not a Mexican crisis. It was an imported crisis. US is a disaster with the mortgage security, and all that impacted us. And we had the downfall of 5.1% in 2009. But going beyond that downfall, I want to talk about the recovery of the following year. And we can see that after a downfall, it is absolutely normal to see a rebound. And the dilemma is like to define what is a rebound and what is recovery. When we look at the history of economics, maybe nobody has explained to me the definition for rebound, which doesn't exist. Actually, there is no definition for crisis either because it's very hard to define. They teach us like contraction, expansion, but rebound, it's a very like regular term that we are used to as economists. But after such a downfall, you have two effects. In one hand, the economy contracts. So anything that you produce in a percentage will be more noticeable. So you will see a recovery in terms, only in mathematical terms, just as a percentage. When you compare to a lower base, as your cake is now smaller, growth is noticeable, much more noticeable. And in these years of crisis, with the ambiguity that accompanies the definition of crisis, there are some sectors that die, there are some sectors that recover, there are some sectors that surge. So throughout history and economic history worldwide, it is during the years of crisis where things change. And they can change so much that they give more jobs, new ways to structure economies, and actually some sectors disappear from society. For instance, in the past it has destroyed the feudal system, but when you're immersed in the crisis, you don't notice what you are experiencing, and you notice after times go by, after years go by, and you will go like, oh, this happened. I think this is a similar moment. The 2020 drop down, which was more than 8% in the Mexican economy, where factories closed, where stores closed, where jobs were lost, everything rearranged. There was a lot of uncertainty. And by the way, this uncertainty isn't over yet. We're still wondering what will come. And this will be accompanied this year by a rebound. And yes, I am not being very precise with the definition of rebound, but what do I mean for this? We won't grow, at least with the numbers we have now, more than what we fell last year. But if we grew this year 8.5%, we wouldn't be recovered yet because we would be in a place lower than what we were prior to the 2020 crisis. So talking about 6.2, 6.5 growth, I think it's still a very important number because it's a positive news which are very welcome after a year like 2020, which was deeply complicated, not only in terms of economics, but also health, right? And in terms also of schools, work, jobs, all these was complicated. So the fact that we have growth this year around 6 or 7%, I think it's a very positive news, and we needed to find this optimism, as you mentioned before. So it is fundamental. The investment in the country is fundamental. In considering the level of Mexico, we would like it to be around the 25%. That is a number that is like widely accepted. The 25%, we would like that 20 out of these 25% was private investment and just 5% of public investment. Because public investment can, of course, turn into public investment. We cannot think of these two like two separate things because there's no doubt about this. They go hand by hand. Public investment detonates private investment. And in this moment, Mexico is living a situation which is complex in the matter of investment. We were still not recovered on the numbers that we were seeing prior to the pandemic, but I would like to question everybody. I don't think we would like to recover pre-pandemic levels. I think we should all aim to a better number, because prior to the pandemic we were not in this 25% either. So I don't want Mexico to go back to pre-pandemic numbers. It is important in the short term, but in the long term, I want Mexico to grow more, to invest more. And in order to get that, we need to recover growth in investment. And there's a very important subject here: employment, formal employment. We're still far away from where we were on pre pandemic levels. And once again, these numbers, I just show them in the context of the Mexican population. Every year, around 1.2 million people go into economic public population. In the best of scenarios, we would have to create at least 1.2 million employments every year, or jobs. But let me tell you, never in history we've had that growth in employment. So what we have done, we've been creating a deficit in formal employment. That's very important for the country. And why is that? Because this kind of employment that's taxable, and it's also the kind of employment that you have social security rights. And we want a society that has social security. Maybe we need to think of a more modern security system, or social security system, because our system comes from late 1940s, and they are not like on time with the times that we're living in now. I think that yes, we need to have social security, but what kind of social security? Maybe the model we were using is no longer available, and we needed to invent something different. This crisis, these downfalls, give us like the opportunity to be creative, and I hope we can do it. And a sector that has always moved the Mexican economy is external econ. Since 1994, Mexico has turned into a very interconnected economy with North America. We are a very like trade country. I remember some books back in my elementary that said that Mexico was like an oil-driven economy, but I was not quite sure about that. That's still being said, but I don't think it's like an oil-driven economy. I think it is a trade-ordered economy. Mexico buys a lot of products from all over the world. We need to remember that Mexico is one of the countries with the most economic agreements, and Mexico adds value to these products and then exports them back. So that is the engine of Mexican industry, at least for this year, and I think the upcoming 2 years they will be very like connected with the US economy. Let's look at the growth of the US and Mexico compared. People that say that we are not like related maybe haven't seen this plot. Of course we are related. It's not like this is because of this, but I am just plotting here the production in Mexico and US production. And take a look at how the GDP in Mexico is more volatile. When it grows more, and when it falls deeper. So Mexican economy has more tachycardia than the US, but there is a relation, that's clear. And in moments where the Mexican economy needs to be pushed on forward, I appreciate that the US economy is growing what it will grow this year. The estimations go around 6 or 7%. So that push from the US economy will be key for Mexico's development. Why? Because it is our main trade partner, and they will buy more. So in that matter, what we export, what we sell the rest of the world, maybe we think it depends on us, but it doesn't depend on us. It depends on our main partner, the US. And if the United States is doing well, we're doing well. So this year, the US is doing well. At least in economy, they have other problems, but at least in economics, they will have a good growth. And in that regard, Mexico needs to take advantage of that wave. When I say take advantage of, I'm not saying that we should wait for it to be driven by its own, but this economic agreement, the FTA that replace the TLC. It's not just about the wave of the US economy. I think we need to look also to small and medium-sized companies, also to work against corruption. And there are some specific things that we need to address, and the market will not solve that on its own. But if we intervene in a good way with money, effort, and time, Mexico's economy will be driven very importantly for a better purpose. So we're always thinking on what will happen to Mexico this year, and we wonder what will happen to Mexico this year. But I was in a talk about growth in 2021, and I was like, we're in September already, so we need to look further than that, beyond that, and we should think of not only what's coming in this political term with this party. We need to go beyond that and think what is the country that we want. A country is not constructed in 1 2 years. It is constructed, yes, with your actions, with your everyday actions, but there are also some other things that we need to consider, like for instance energetic policies and social security, people's rights. There's also a lot of things that we needed to take care of. For instance, education. How will we use this technological change that the world is experiencing with with educational system that was created on the 50s? We need to rethink that, not just by changing the books kids have at school. We need to change the ways and the aims of these policies. This is very related with the policy, of course, and politics. Investment, economics, employment, all these needs to change in order to change economy. So the relevant question is, where do we want to go? Where do we want to go after? And I was remembering Alicia in Wonderland some days, which is, by the way, not a book for kids. And in this chapter, Alicia is walking in this fantasy world and she sees nothing. It's all dark, she's in the wild, and she finds this cat with the smiling, bright smile that appears and disappears in the night. And Alicia asks the cat, "Could you tell me what way should I follow to get out from here?" And the cat says just a phrase, "It depends. Where do you want to go?" And Alicia says, "I don't really care. I don't really care where am I going to." And the cat says, "Well, then the way or the path doesn't matter anyway." So I think that's what's happening in Mexico. We are taking decisions without considering where do we need to go. We're considering just a law here, a change there, and we don't think that as a whole, what country do we need to be? And I would like to show just 3 scenarios so we don't get into deep waters. And one option is just to stay where we're at, to follow the path that we're following, for instance, in energetic terms, like to keep on investing in Pemex, and just keep on with that idea. And also with economics, like allowing informal commerce and informal employment. We are not training our labor force, and I think that's a huge opportunity for Mexico because we still have very important demographics and investment, but they're still like very ambiguous, and we think also like where the laws, where's the rule of law? We need to close the gaps created by the pandemic. The pandemic created a greater gap in education than what we had already. And if we want to be a developed country with a more equal society, we need to close that gap. And in terms of environment policies, I think we need to make a lot of changes and not only stay where we're at. One way is to change moderately, like to keep on with an open, energetic um, scene, and also have this public and private investment, right? And we need to make some changes in unemployment to have like a lower competence. They are still competing a lot for budgets, for wages, and it is very unproductive. I think it's stupid to have so much like unavailable projects when Mexico needs the other thing. We just don't need to change the makeup in our educational system. We need to change from the root. Because if you get to your house and and if you wear down the makeup that you were wearing, you will be just as where you were before. And in Mexico, that happens a lot. So we needed to we need to do things like in a better way to fulfill our changes. The true change will come when we are clear on what the vision for a better country is. I would like a better energetic reform, like oriented to produce renewable energies that take care of the planet, a drastic change in employment, and a drastic change that's very analyzed and very carefully done, considering social security with innovation, something like more in line with the society that we are in today, something with a legal framework, legal frame, and we want to be again Mexico like a country to be an attractive place to invest with a very good workforce that's not only manufacturing but they also add value, analyze trends. I would like to see these kind of changes and for education to have in the big part of the majority of the population to go into this wave of technological changes and to be ready to take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution that we are living. And maybe we haven't foreseen its magnitude then, but I think we should all be concerned about the environment. We cannot keep on just producing, extracting from the environment and destroying the environment. We need to change the way we're doing things, and I hope we can have an environmental polity oriented to that. We Is it on us to take this decision? Yes, it is. Nobody will take that decision for us. Let's not forget that this country wasn't made up by Martians. This is the country that we have because of the decisions we have taken, and it will be the country of the future with the decisions that we will take. So it's in our hands.
Thank you very much, Valeria. Honestly, it was very interesting and very clear. The tour you took us around the past of the economic past of Mexico, and how we can have a better country with better proposals at a long term. Thank you so much. Now we want to hear from the opinions of Gabriel. So, Gabriel, the floor is yours. Give us your perspective. Thank you very much, Manuel. It is a true privilege to be here with you, Valeria. Thank you very much. It was a very cool reflection. And like always, put two economists together and you will have three different opinions. Manuel, thank you for moderating it. DHL, thank you for putting this together. Juan Carlos Ackerman and Sergio Morales Hidalgo and David Avitia, thank you very much. I just want to tell you about the economic perspective on September 2021. No, I'm kidding. It was just that Valeria says that we do things in such short notice. But the economic perspective of Mexico and Latin America. Here we have 5 subjects I would like to talk to you about. Number 1, what's going on around the world, what's growing, why it is growing, risks. Many things have already been addressed by Valeria. She did it very well and I'm not going to delve into it. Risks and opportunity in Latin America, the crossroads in Mexico at the short term, what we see for the shorter future. We coincide in many things. Anyway, the global economy is growing overall. Valeria mentioned that the US most likely will grow by 7%. So in this same vein, I am glad the US is doing alright, but the world in general is growing as well. They are growing due to these 3 things, the ones you can see here on the slide. At the far left, the vaccination, yes, it is unequal. There are sub-Saharan African countries that cannot even achieve 2% of the target population. However, there are countries like Mexico where we have almost 45% with the double doses. The US is around 60%, other countries around 80 something percent with full doses of vaccination, although we see there will be a third doses required for the following. Number 2, here we see the currency attitude. Central banks lower the rates to 0 almost, and you know in economy everything is price and quantity. Valeria will not let me lie. The interest rates went almost to zero. Everyone is scared when they see negative rates because imagine you will reward those taking a credit and you will punish savers. That is the reason why the financial system it will not work correctly. How are you going to save if you're going to be lending, right? Due to these things, among others, we preferred, I mean, since price was not a stimulus, we needed to get the stimulus from quantity. A lot of bills started to be printed, and in order to release them, assets need to be purchases. Balances seem positive, and we have balances we never even thought of in central banks. The Federal Reserve has an 8.5 billion dollars and billion dollars here. Even if we hear that even if we hear that we need to start recovering the monetary stimulus, is there third tax stimulus? 99% of countries around the world had unprecedented tax stimuli. The US, notably the most important one. We say that in the past 18 months, 6 packages of tax stimuli were passed. It adds up to 27% points of GDP. I said, is this little or much? It is much because we'd never seen it before. But what are we comparing it with? Fiscal exemption in the US was the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan helped rebuild Europe after the Second World War, and it turns out I will bring the Marshall Plans to up to the present. These are like 6 Marshall Plans. This is unprecedented what we're seeing in the US, and the best is yet to come. Infrastructural programs. What we see is a picture of taxes unprecedented in the world, particularly in the US. That is the reason why the figures we see on the left side, the 7% in the US, as Valeria was talking about, growth rates that are pretty high. But talking about specifically in the US and these crossroads, we see that although in the third quarter people at the markets were expecting 8%, and there was a lot of disappointment when they saw it grow by 6.5, but it is still quite a lot. And if we see the GDP of the US, top right corner, it is 0.8 percentage points above the pandemic time. It was not just a rebound, as you can see. Yeah, it was recovery, this very technical term we're using. I know it's a bit of a headache, but most importantly, if we see other indicators like the S&P 500 index, the one from the stock exchange of the US, is at a historical maximum. The results of the companies said that more than 85% of the 500 companies there reported above the estimates, and there were already very big reports being there that were there. It's already well sustained. What are the risks? What are the risks? Sanitary risks, inflation risks, and the supply chain risks that maybe this rings a bell for you. So why talk about the markets and the risks? When we see the price in the market, this means the people willing to pay that for it, and they are taking risks into account. See the S&P 500 historical maximum, an ever-growing trend. It doesn't mean to stop anytime soon. Well, today was a different story, but that's today. The bonus rates in the US, the one you see in red at the middle, has increased, but the 2-year one, it remains pretty much flat, around zero. The performance of the dollar has been strengthening against the margin of other currencies. What does this tell us? There are risks out there, yes, but in the sanitary component, maybe governments are not imposing as many restrictions. Company will continue to operate and making profit. The rates, there is an inflationary risk, but they see it as a not so short-term risk. Rates are not budging much, so at the middle term it doesn't mean much of a risk, but eventually at some point the Federal Reserve will have to increase rates, not tomorrow, not next month, not December, most likely until 2023, and this makes dollars stronger gradually. In general, markets are taking risks into consideration, at least the ones we can perceive so far, but none are as big and as important. I will present to you 3 graphs. The 3 of them have the same. The one in green is daily outbreaks, in the minimum deaths, and daily vaccinations, the one in blue. In this fourth global wave, this is the global picture, then we see the US's and Mexico's. Yes, it has been quite strong, but not as strong as the third wave we've already seen. And unfortunately, deaths worldwide have been much lower, and there is some lagging behind. They they get the disease, and then a couple of weeks after they die. At the end of the day, human life is very important. I'm pretty sure most of you have lost a beloved one due to COVID, and that's deeply sad. However, the vaccinations seem to be working because it is going up. Yes, I know many countries are still to be vaccinated, and it is working virtually because restrictions are not being imposed virtually anywhere, and we see the death rate is not going up. What happened in the US? Very similar to this. The outbreak wave is been this is the fourth, not as big as the third. It looked the same, but it stopped, and death rates, it seems a lot more feasible. It is not as high as for the communication of the disease. They started vaccinating, and ever since it has dropped. Unfortunately, many people are well against it. I don't want to get in that debate, but truth be told, it has helped the people who have been vaccinated. But vaccinations being lower than compared to where they haven't got it in the sub-Saharan Africa, that is a subject for growth in the US. In the case of Mexico, we haven't had the fourth wave, this is the third, and it seems as though we have already peaked. Many children are going back to school, so there will be a lot more social interaction. And however however the number of protocols we have, we could reach another peak. I hope not. Fortunately, the vaccination has increased. We see the number of deaths not growing as much as in the previous wave, and vaccinations, although we have seen some backfiring in the terms of in terms of daily doses. I remember we started around 5 or 6,000 on the 24th of December. People said that Mexico was going to be over with it around 2050s. It was never going to be like that. It started little by little, and then it increased. We have had over 1,400,000 doses administered in a day, and until yesterday we have around 411,000 doses a day. I think we're doing quite alright, but this is another risk in which supply chain is involved. Car production in Mexico, the graph is pretty volatile, and it has the retooling element, the periods where they have to change tools. I'm pretty sure you know more about it than myself, but we see the trend. Although the drop and this backfiring, should we ignore those elements, it's still going down. And it doesn't mean we're not producing cars in Mexico. This is a worldwide situation. We see that the lack of certain inputs like semiconductors or chips are having a main impact. How many cars do we have already there just waiting for the chip to send it to leaderships? The graph on the right side is impressive. We see many models of cars, around 100,000 cars that are stopped because they're just waiting for the chips. The chip is a main issue. Those are some of the things you know better about, but one of them is the lack of planning. Planning last year was incredibly difficult. Yesterday, planning was very tough. Consumption habit changes. All of a sudden, you have a tremendous demand of TVs, video games, and whatnot, and on the other hand, car demand was lowered. So chips are used to make up for another demand. We still have the same level of demand for computers, TVs, and video games at the same time as the demand for cars has increased. So the installed capacity cannot grow as fast. It will take a few more months. We are coming closer to a positive result, but there are still some months down the road. I'm just focusing here on the car chips. Many other industries have suffered from the same thing, and it is precisely the lack of certain inputs that has driven prices up. We see an important clash when it comes to raw material inputs that are reflected in the US economy. On the left hand side, we see metals as copper. It has increased significantly. Many foods as grains, corn in green, and energetics such as oil, what we see in gray. it hasn't increased more. The prices remain high, but they didn't increase more. And if we see it from the perspective of companies and the surveys that they carry out, like the PNI indexes, ISL indexes, what purchasing managers have reported to pay for inputs, it was increasing for the whole year. Fortunately, it has remained still high, but it is not going any higher. We have inflationary problems, but we're not going as high. Bottom left, we see inflation markets. Inflation markets in 3 years, we think will be around 3% in the US. That is not too high, but compared to the levels we've seen in the past 3 years, sometimes it was 2% or lower. What the households think. Lower right side, and a study conducted by Michigan University. This is interesting. Expectations for inflation in a year are high, the ones in red, but over 5 years, they are all right. So I think this is more of a transitional phenomenon. The problem is that with inflation, we have the big risk that makes everyone feel unsettled. When the Federal Reserve will increase interest rates. Valeria said that the 94 crisis, you couldn't turn to anyone because it was our problem, and I agree 100%. But on top of that, we were incredibly unlucky because on top of what we had in the 94, it is not that they created the reserve. It was like a bit of a show there. It is always an issue here. And just to get some perspective, the Federal Reserve lowered rates almost to zero. They didn't want to lower them anymore. They favor quantity. Usually the variables are inflation and employment. If we see employment on the left-hand side, the blue one says how employment went from the crisis since 2008 and 2009. The numbers below is the number of months once the crisis started. At 17 months since recession, back then we were still 5% short to go back to the pre-crisis levels. And the worst is that it was still decreasing. It took quite a while. Employment took quite a while to recover. But see the red one. At 17 months, it's been down. It's going back up at 3.7 points to reach pre-pandemic levels. It is going up in spite of the report we had last Friday. Recovery of employment is going fast in the US. The one on the right, we have three graphs. The one in blue is interest rates, almost flat in zero. The other blue line is all the liquidity in the market, and the red one is inflation by the Federal Reserve. Not the one we see in Mexico. For consumers, it's a more complex one, but it is all the same at the end of the day. This is the driving factor of consumption prices. But just picture this. When it was announced in 2013 that $85 million were being purchased in bonuses every month, it was said that the purchases were going down, not even selling what they bought, but they were no longer buying. The market, the stock exchanges went down, they crashed. It was back in May 2013. This is where the blue line was in $4.5 trillion. So inflation was not even 2%. And you see the balance now is in $8.2 trillion. Is 3.5 in inflation. I think it is high time purchases started going down. Today the Federal Reserve is buying $121 million a month. The reserves of the Bank of Mexico are above $220 billion. Imagine the US is purchasing $120 billion a month. They will start lowering it when? I will tell you in a minute. But what I think will happen is, on top of all that, let's just see at the fiscal component. The taxing packages from 2008 and 9 was $1.5 trillion. Now it was quadrupled. And we have more infrastructure products, so it needs to be done. When is it going to start? I think it will be announced on the 22nd of September, that they will start in December. From the 120, they will start decreasing by increments of 10, 90, 80, until they reach zero. And by 2023, most likely interest rates will go up. This is what the market and the whole financial sector is looking at today. And you won't let me lie. Risks and opportunity in Latin America, to start talking about Mexico. In Latin America, growth was among all echelons. It was very unequal. Brazil fell, 4.1%, 5.8%. It turns out that Peru is the one with the highest contraction, 11.1%. So yes, tremendous contraction in Latin America, of course, however, very different. The first growth in this year is very different due to the rebound effect, and this is how we can appreciate it on the chart at the right side. The International Monetary Fund says that the country expected to grow the most is Peru. However, they were the ones who fell the lowest, and Mexico. Fortunately, we were in one of the lowest ones. We were around the middle part. But in general, it has to do with the rebound effect. We could think, how was this even, what sort of help was there? Any taxes help or monetary help? Yes, if we look at the monetary side on the left hand side, we see debt increasing in those countries. Not everything is debt increase. It has to do with money given for COVID. One part of the debt is external. The exchange rate was appreciated against the dollar due to this, but this is just an approximate on how much was injected. Peru doubled its debt in order to help, and still is the one that fell the hardest, but it will be the one that will rebound the highest. In Chile, a little bit, Brazil substantially, Argentina, those are the countries that grew the most this year. So not necessarily was the debt used or had the desired effects, at least when it comes to GDP. But if we see at the metrics of poverty, we don't have all of them yet, but in Brazil it was pretty well handled. Instead of increasing poverty, it was decreased. It worked pretty well in certain places, not really the case in Colombia. A lot of the debt was spent, and unfortunately they had more poverty. On the monetary side, banks lowered the rates significantly, like in Brazil, in Peru, but all central banks except for the one in Colombia have increased the rates, even Mexico. The Federal Reserve hasn't started, but just the expectation compels Central American banks drive the inflation up, and hence central banks will increase their rates. This is where the crossroads is. We see almost in all places, inflation fell due to recession. What happened with recessions back in the 80s and 90s? You look at your textbook and it said inflation, when it goes up, in Mexico it will go up, in Colombia it will go up, same as in Brazil and Argentina. It behaved like we were taught finally, and not the other way around, exactly. But it is going up. We see inflation going up. The one in Argentina, it had to be on the one on the right hand side because it is above 50%. We see some have lost some degree of investment, like in Colombia, due to debt increases that have been accompanied by some fiscal reform or consolidation. In the countries that we have here, the largest in Latin America, there are three left with certain degree of investment: Mexico, Peru, and Chile. So it is important to consolidate this fiscal component in order not to lose it. Many countries in Latin America, especially South America, are facing a lot of social unrest, protests. Just remember 2019, one of the icons there was that there were many protests around the world. In Chile, Santiago, people were burning the trains, the metro trains. Problems in Brazil, Colombia, by all means, Lebanon, and it all seemed like some little thing. Like in Lebanon, they wanted to impose taxes on WhatsApp calls, and people went out to the streets. It's not just that, it's inequality. This is what broke the camel's back. The straw that broke the camel back, inequality. In Latin America, we had elections not that long ago. We will have elections soon enough, like we see on the calendar on the right side. What happens here is that most countries in South America, except for Mexico, are facing certain pre-electoral problems, such as Colombia or Chile. They will have elections in November, Brazil, or they are facing post-electoral problems like Peru or Argentina. This is causing great effervescence, and it seems a very complicated picture in Latin America. But there are very important things here. Valeria mentioned this a bit ago. I looked at it from another eye. but it is very similar. We are brother countries. We have a demographic bonus. The medium of age is 31 years old in America. This doesn't have it. They don't have that in Europe. They don't have that in the U.S. anywhere. It has the dependence coefficient has decreased, so it helps you be more free. There is a gender bonus. If there is a continent that could be benefited from gender equality, is Latin America. And many men say, oh, you know what, if we start having gender quotas, men will run out of work. And I say, okay, hold on a minute. There's always been more women if we have more women working, the GDP will grow bigger. This is something we need in Latin America. The gender bonus is brutal. The ESG policies, some companies do it well, some others just want to get in the picture. We need this desperately. Just look at the participation rate of women in Latin America. 46% men is 60%. It was around 70% a few years ago. But we need gender equality. This will make GDP grow. This doesn't mean we're running out of jobs. There will be more jobs to be filled. That's important. Environmental bonus. I know certain companies are concerned about it. DHL is by all means one of them. The environmental bonus is very important. Latin America, we have 40% of the biodiversity in the world. It is impressive the biodiversity we have, and it is interlinked with growth, and future policies will have to consider this in order to preserve our habitats. 75% of forest areas are over here, most of them in Brazil, but there are many resources to exploit, and I don't mean the forest, but many points to exploit in ESDG. But they are feasible. Expenditure, as Valeria said, in education, infrastructure, health, greater development of the financial system. We have less paperwork to make businesses flow more without transition costs. Strengthening, we have heard this for many years in Latin America in different levels, but it can be done, it is feasible, and there are many areas of opportunity. When the private sector comes to the government and says, I can solve this problem for you, it's worked. What happened in Chile when somebody came and said, hey, you know what, I can help you with the tax declaration so you can be more agile with it. They didn't need any law or reform. It was done automatically. In Mexico, we did the same thing. Our tax services, SAT, did the same. When the private sector comes bringing ideas to the government to make improvements, or the private sector among the private sector, it works, and we don't need big reforms. Valeria said it, so I'm going to go over it quickly. This is GDP on the side of supply, agricultural and services. You know, we are mainly a service economy. Over 65% of economic activity is on services. And what we see with the biggest growth in the top part is the industrial area. It has to do with manufacturing, and when it comes to services, transportation has recovered quite a bit, and they are sort of together, manufacturing and services. It says a lot about the growth of the US because it is permeating the fiscal package by fostering manufacturing exports, remittances, and tourism. Textbooks, what do they tell us about GDP? Consumption, investment, expenditure. Yes, and we see GDP in Mexico, and we don't see this reflected up until a month. On added demand, aggregated demand, we have GDP, consumption, and expenditure, but when we see the graphs on the right side, the sector that became the most dynamic is imports and exports. We are being drawn into it, and the one beyond the public expenditure is investment. This is the one we need to foster in order to make any sustainable rate. The recovery hasn't been the same. It has been quite unequal, as a matter of fact. On the sectorial side, the left, and the regional or geographic one on the right one. On the sectorial side, we see health services. They are at 116, almost 117%. And this is not just pre-pandemic levels. Before the pandemic, we reached the peak in the third quarter of 2018. For very sad reasons, we needed many medical services for COVID, but it is well above that. Another interesting one was real estate services. We normally during recession, The real estate sector plummets, but it is doing quite well. It is around the third quarter of 2018, and I think it reflects something important. It is closely related to credits in Mexico. Mortgages is the one in positive rates. Why not the rest? Because this is a reflection on the pandemic. Home office and home at work is becoming standardized. Many of you are at home following us. You're doing home office in one way or another. What happens here is people, instead of living in a small apartment near the workplace, they went out in the suburbs or somewhere else in the beach, taking advantage of the low mortgages. If they would buy a home. We have seen important changes that COVID left for us. But when it comes to transportation, it's already in green, 93.8. If we looked at it in the first quarter, this is second quarter information, it was around 70 something percent. So it was yellow. Transportation has recovered pretty swiftly, and the construction sector, it recovered quite a bit, but it got stagnated at 84%. The two most affected sectors were restaurants and hotels. They were at 60%. A quarter ago, they are about 75%. And leisure activities such as cinemas, theaters, all of those things are well beyond those levels, and they are taking some time. If we see the geography on the right hand side, states such as Baja California, close to the US, they were the first ones to receive the fiscal stimulation packages. They are above the typical levels. Tabasco, which is the only state that grew last year due to priority projects from the government, the refinery and the train. The two most affected states were Quintana Roo and Baja California Sur due to touristic problems. This is first quarter information. Why not having it updated? It's not out there yet. Once I have it updated, I can happily speak to you again. But with the tourism we had in the second term, it is more likely that they recover by 5-10 percentage points. This is how states grew after 2020. The only state that grew was Tabasco. The rest of the states in the country fell. The forecast for 2021, we have major increases in certain sectors, especially manufacturing, due to this thrust provided by the US. This is the exchange rate. I'm already done with economic activity. Now I'm talking about exchange rates. It is quite steady. We could see for 2020 by the end of the year, 2090 for the next year, and even though the Federal Reserve will start reactivating monetary stimulus, we think it will be gradual, and Mexico has already increased rates. Inflation didn't come from the exchange rate. There was depreciation last year, but this year we've been quite steady. But we have seen more inflation in Mexico. I think if we follow the graph on the left, these are the forecasts of the Bank of Mexico. The darker the line, the more recent the update. The one we see on the left, it says that it would be hard for inflation to come back up to the goal of the bank, 3%. The one on the right, this is taken away from the most volatile components such as energy and food, fresh food. The same thing. Why is inflation more persistent than in other countries? In the US it grew, but I think it will go down very quickly. This is due to the lack of fiscal support. Everything has a positive and a negative side. The positive side of not having this stimulus, we look pretty alright when we compare ourselves to emerging countries. We didn't increase our debt, but it has costs in Mexico. Inflation. Well, I was taught that if you spend, what do you mean if I don't spend, there will be more inflation? This is the pandemic. What happened in the US? A gym, a restaurant, a hotel that didn't have any people, didn't have income. How did they survive? Money from the government. So when the citizens go demand these products and services, they get it. They don't have to increase prices much. But in Mexico, many companies disappear. When people go look for the product or service, it is non-existent anymore, and this is where we will have to pay higher prices, the consumers. And the new companies that will come about, which is happening, the companies are being set up, they will have to deal with the starting cost, and it makes inflation more steady. Everything has a cost and a benefit. That is the reason why we think the Bank of Mexico went ahead. We thought they were going to start increasing. They were going to increase rates by November or December, and they did so until June. but they still have 3 meetings for the years. We have a 4.25% rate. By next year, if they will have to increase it a bit more, because we will have new governors who this is a responsible person. It is weird for a governor to increase the rate and just as they take office. But at minimum, due to the reputational subject, they will have to increase it at least once. It will be done. And let's get ready for a second increase cycle when the Federal Reserve comes to play. The rates in Mexico, I don't think will be above 8.25%, maybe 7.5% at some point in 22-23. With all this, I would like to wrap up with Mexico moving forward. This is not just for the sake of talking fast, but because Valeria is pressuring me. She talked about GDP at the long term. Back to when we didn't even have the GDP. We have it since 1896. Yeah, I can pass the data to you. Back then, we didn't measure with GDP, it didn't exist. This is a metric we had until after, but the drop is not the only one. As you see, we had another one the last year. The rebound is very important, but it is not as big as the fall, and this is a symptom of the pandemic that is not over yet. Something important, many people say, what happens now when we dropped a lot? More so than in the 94. And people say when back in 94 I felt like it was the end of the world and we had a bigger drop and we didn't feel it as bad. It has to do with what you said, the recurring crisis. You mentioned inflation, exchange rate. We have depreciation of over 300% of a certain exchange rate. That was a red line. This drew inflation in blue, and we had inflations above 150% back in the 80s, and this drew interest rates in green. And this wiped everything out. This wiped out dreams and savings. But see, the exchange rate did have some fluctuation, but we no longer have it. And there are 4 pillars to this. We know about it because we've heard it so many times. Flexible exchange rate, autonomous central bank, fiscal responsibility law, and a solid banking system. These are the 4 pillars that have saved us from the recurring crisis we had. The peso today, the commercial part, and due to the development of the Mexican peso, is the second most utilized currency in the world. At some point, it was the first one after the Chinese yuan. We are the second emerging most used um, currency. Before, we didn't have it in the country. They are absorbed by the exchange rate today. Number 2, we had a bonus curve. I will not go back to 94. We couldn't even issue any bonuses. But in 99, we were issuing 1-year bonuses. It seems like so long ago, but it is not that far back. Our first 30-year bonus, as you see in the graph, we could issue it in 2006. Having built the curve where the rates are much lower, fortunately, has allowed the government to finance a lot better. And in public finances, this is pure gold because this talks about the duration. When do you have to renegotiate debt? In the year 2000, every zero point 0.7 years, like every 8 months. Yeah, like every 8 months we had to renegotiate the debt. Today, this takes 11 years. This talks about a completely different country to the one we had back then. That's why we'd had the levels of investment we'd had. When we fall below the dotted line, Mexico has been above that threshold of investment, and we feel that we're going to keep it up. 2 years ago, surveys that many of my colleagues used to talk about, we they would say they were being too optimistic, but not quite. With all of this, the picture is pretty clear. We can keep investments up, and something important in the political realm. With the politics, we have had so many citizenry participation. In 2021, in the last elections, the intermediate, as you see the ones in gray, we have less participation, but it was a lot more than the previous time, 53% during the pandemic. I think that was quite spectacular. and there was balance of power. The lower chamber between Morena, Partido de Trabajo, and Partido Verde had more than two-thirds, which is what you need to change the constitution. They have 50% plus one. Simple majority. There is change, there is a sway of power. Not everybody votes the same. This is a changing society in Mexico that pays attention to the picture and demands changes. We see it in the main cities, in the largest cities. Mexico City, we had an important change in when it comes to municipalities. In Estado de Mexico, the west part of Estado de Mexico was won by PRI and PAN. And in the state of Jalisco, we know several years that Movimiento Ciudadano has been present there. All municipalities were for this party. In the state of Nuevo León, that has been very progressive, but they have had certain particular governors, but yeah, they change very often. Most municipalities were won by a different political party, and we have 2 more years with election processes that will be useful before the main elections to see how this vibrant society that goes out to vote and demands changes. That's why Morena is in power, because they wanted a change. Sometimes, and the trend has changed. We have 6 different changes from here to 2023 before the presidential elections in 24. And trade, this is important, and this is my last point. I know you see many dots there, but in the axis of the X, you see how open an economy is, and on the y-axis, the vertical one, is the growth. And even though the picture is not as clear, it seems that the more open you are economically speaking, the more access you have to growth. I think this is incredibly important, and it has driven economic growth. Valeria said we have many trade agreements. You see all trade agreements there. We're one of the countries with the most free trade agreements around the world. There is growth in 93, a very similar graph to the one Valeria presented. Mexico's trade grew by 300% from year 93 up until today. You said we're not an oil-based economy. This is the graph on the right. The line in gray says production of oil for GDP. At some point, we are 4% in GDP. All the oil industry is just 4 points of GDP. And if we're talking about exports, in 93, that was 46% of all exports. We used to export oil, but today this is less than 7%. So definitely we're not an oil-based economy. And the graph on the left side, this is not GDP, this is the manufactured production. This is quite impressive. Valeria's graph was very clear, but this is even clearer. It is almost the same line on top of the other. There is a scary correlation with the US, and if you see on the right side, there is a major correlation between what we export and the imports and the intermediate periods that Valeria mentioned. China now, we have been the competition of China since well behind. What US imported from China was a lot even before China entered the World Trade Organization back in 2001. But since the Mexico trade agreement approval due to the pandemic and the geopolitical tensions between China and the US, it has decreased. This is a golden ticket to an opportunity due to all the chains being manufactured. All manufacturers and suppliers want to be closer to consumption centers. This is a main opportunity. Some are taking advantage of it, some others are not, and some other gold opportunities. Top 10 exports per country. Mexico exports 76% to the US. How much more can we export to the rest? China is becoming a consumption country more than exports. And yes, I see tremendous opportunities here. We have seen these graphs for many years, and these are still valid opportunities to today. And the things where we have ranked top, in 2019 we were leaders in delivery trucks, tractors, beer, fruit, loading wagons, and others such as sugars, paper. In general terms, we see that in many things, in products that we don't even think of, we have been the leaders in industries. I see both in Latin America and in Mexico opportunities that we can take advantage of. And in many cases, you don't need large reforms. In many cases, the private sector is so big. In Mexico, the private sector is 85% of the GDP. In Brazil, is 75%. In Mexico, is 85%. The private sector can do a lot when it comes to seizing these opportunities, and this is the way we will get back up on. And this is the end of my presentation. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was really very complete and very interesting. And before going back with Claudia and Sergio, I would like to ask you something. Understanding that this, of course, has a lot to do with health aspects, but do you think that the worst part of the impact of the COVID-19 is behind us? Yes, I think it has, because I don't think we'll go back to those figures. I don't know if I'm speaking out from desire, what I want, because despite all the variants that can exist, vaccination will move on forward, and the evidence is that they help. They help a lot, regardless of the variant that's around. I think that this will be like seasonal, like the influenza, where we will have like yearly vaccines, but also no country will go back to the radical and extreme economic close downs that we saw, and it is because that's not possible to have. So I would like to rationalize this and say that the worst part is behind us, but I think there are challenges that we won't able to foresee.
Yes, I agree with Valeria, and I just want to add a couple of things. Number one, people say there's another pandemic coming or something else. But with the precautions we will have from now on, sanitizing your hands several times a day, it is possible to avoid another pandemic due to the precautions we have now. The worst of the pandemic in terms of economic impact is gone already, and unlike many people think, even if we had other type of pandemics, we will be better equipped. Even with the influenza, we will be better equipped because we will have habits we didn't have before, and they help minimize or mitigate the risk. I feel optimistic about it, and I hope this is also inside of the reality.
Yes, the vaccinations are changing the game plan a lot, and
Yes, that was the point that I wanted to make. This opens the picture for many other things, even if we have other viruses or stuff like AIDS, many other diseases. Thank you very much once again for your participation. I would like to welcome Claudia and Sergio once again.
well, thank you very much, Manuel. Thank you, Valeria and Gabriel. It was definitely a very interesting topic. I'll say that I couldn't walk by because I was just staring at your presentation. And of course, after this, we have a lot of questions from the audience, and I would like to address some of them. Valeria, how can we distinguish between a rebound and a real recovery? It's like somebody, a regular person who doesn't know much about economics as you.
Well, it is very important to say that there is no definition for rebound. We use the term of rebound just to say you're growing more than you decreased, right? If you grow beyond where you used to be at the beginning, then that's recovery. When you grow less than where you were at the beginning, but this is the very informal definition. There is no official definition. Mexico fell by 8.2, and we will rebound 6.2. The U.S. fell by 3.5, and this year it is forecasted that they will grow 3.5. That's recovery and not a rebound.
Excellent, thank you so much. And there's a second question for Gabriel. How do you think it will affect this inflation and the high price of transportation in containers, sea containers?
Well, that's a great question. I think you're better equipped than me to answer to it. I will give you my answer, and then you add on to it. I think when we see such an important increase like the ones we see in containers, it went from $6,000 to 14,000. These are brutal increments. What happens here? Most of the times, the industries where you cannot change things as quickly, what happens is the price system works. It is alive. There is a wave shock that goes beyond the supply, and what you need is more containers, more ships. So, in this vein, I'm happy we have this pricing system because this is an unequivocal signal to know what we need. We need more of this, more of that. More jobs will be created, new technologies will come about, and what will happen with prices? They will most likely go down. Not all of them, the agricultural ones certainly not, but for certain other things, yes, we will keep prices high, and the world needs to think about new prices for containers, and this will be reflected on how much companies and countries will be able to transfer it to the consumer. Even if this is temporary, I think it is temporary, prices will remain high, and we will have to get used to new prices. And there is no other way about it. Inflation will be transitory in certain countries. Yes, of course. What do you mean transitory? That it's over tomorrow, in a year? I think in many developed countries, inflation will go back as soon as next year to its normal levels, and for emerging countries, perhaps it would take a bit longer. Excellent, thank you very much. Valeria, besides public investment, what other sector do you consider could drive Mexico's growth?
Well, very important subject because public investment depends on the current government, current administration, and evidently a country cannot just wait and see what the government will decide. As Gabriel mentioned, 85% of Mexican economy comes from the private sector, so we should just give the responsibility to the government. It's not just public investment like just like that. It is what do you invest in. It is not just a figure to put a 5%, but they need to be quality projects that change the structural conditions of the economy. And many times these projects are not like visible. What do I mean by this? That they are just like the electric grid or just to regulate the voltage and to lines of transmission, and these are not these like sexy infrastructure that you can make a big show off from, which is like more linked to structure, but it is not like super fancy, but it is something that's needed mostly in the south part of the country. So distinct for the public investment is something that I've heard since I was little, like to simplify administration. In Mexico, we need many days to do any paperwork, and Brazil, for instance, is way ahead of us in that figure. But there's something that we could do about this, and technology is opening the door to do this in a much more efficient way. And I think we should take advantage of this technological leap. And everyone nowadays has a computer with them. Everyone is willing to accept the technological change, and maybe other generations were not so available to do that. My father now is able to do a bank transfer on the phone, and he's willing to do that now instead of going to the bank. So there is a change in the regenerations that will lead through that, but we need to push that too. So we need to the rule of law. The rule of law is fundamental, and if that doesn't change, it will be very difficult for investment to come in the way Mexico needs.
There is no question, Valeria. Thank you very much. We still have some time for a couple more questions. The next one is for Gabriel. How will the lack of chips and semiconductors will affect the global economy? Oof, that is quite a question, Sergio. This is a very tough one. There are two things in life I've been able to predict without being an economist and without having the studies I have. When I learned to use Basic Home, my personal computer back in the 90s, I said, why not having the full year with 4 digits? Why just having the last two? And I said, there will be a problem when we reach the year 2000. Guess what? We had the 2K. Unfortunately, nothing happened here. I didn't even capitalize on that. I was a speaker in the World Economic Forum a few years ago. We had a very remarkable futurologist. I was impacted not just by his knowledge, but by his way of presentation. I was just flabbergasted, and he talked about positive things of the future, use of technology and whatnot. So maybe, and he mentioned the lack of microchips. We are there yet. Again, I didn't capitalize on it. I should have set on my up microchip factory. It's just these two things. I haven't thought of any other major ones, but it is not possible to have as few companies who do microchips. The situation has improved. There were specific microchips for certain things. You know a lot about the subject, Sergio, but we've become more flexible to make it smaller, to make them smaller. Before, you need a specific one for the car or for the computer. Today, you can repurpose production very quickly to use it for cars or computers. At the worst moment of the pandemic, even if the countries were intelligent enough to say, you know what, we will have manufacturing for food and for certain other things as essential activities, that was an important decision after the brutal outbreak in April and May. These made us forget about the microchip situation, but the demand remained very high, and on the other hand, supply was not as big. There are people who have been waiting for 3 years, for 3 months for the car or for a video game console, and they don't have it then. How is it reflected? Prices. We see this being more expensive. Companies that could or serve an order in 2 weeks, they now take 3 months. They pay over prices. This has an inflation effect on the long run. On the short term, it will finish but next year probably. But there will be good opportunities, more factories of microchips. Knowing about this, knowing that the world is becoming increasingly technological, there will be more microchip manufacturers. Most of them are in the southeast of Asia. We will see the decentralization of microchip production. This is something good, but in the meantime, this is bringing economic activity to a halt. Perhaps it will make us more patient as well. Yes, that will be good. We don't want things, we don't want to be like, I need it right away and then to have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And this question will be for both because I think you both will have something very interesting to share. What does make an economy of a country volatile? Well, something very simple. It is like the size of the base, the size of the cake. If you have a smaller cake, any little change in any unit in terms of percentage will be very noticeable. So the bigger the cake is or the economy is where we see the rates, it will be less volatile because your cake is bigger, so any change is less noticeable. So in economies which are very big, we see a very small change. The US is an exception, sometimes surprises us with this 6% increase. It's huge for being the biggest economy on earth. So the size talks about volatility. And it's also about like this, how volatile the region is, for instance, Latin America. And Latin America is a very volatile region. I think that is related to the political volatility, and the rates of growth in all the countries in Latin America change a lot. Maybe Chile is the exception because it's more homogeneous, but Europe has very less volatility, and Asia has some, but not as Latin America. And if we consider it just by states, it is very interesting what happens in each of Mexico's states. For instance, Tabasco. Tabasco was the only state that grew last year, and I'm very happy about that because for years and years, it was going down, like economic-wise. So, and I'm not talking about little contractions, they were huge contractions. So when they constructed this refinery, when they built it, it went up and it was noticeable because the cake is small. And for instance, Nuevo León, there was a little growth, not like other states that grow in two figures, but Nuevo León grows like in a sustainable fashion, and that has allowed Nuevo León to generate development conditions and not using development just as growth, but development like more education, less inequality, and sometimes we think that development is related to equality. But no, Chiapas is very unequal, for instance, and Nuevo León is very equal somehow. And it depends on the structure and the political infrastructure and the volatility of the region and the states. Thank you.
That was a very complete answer. I have barely anything left to say. I just to complement it. What she said is the most important thing. The involvement of governments is very important. And another one, natural disasters in Latin America. They are tremendous. In Central America, we're facing natural disasters on a constant basis. Earthquakes, volcanoes, you name it. We have the whole thing. All of that causes volatility in the economic activity. And number two, this is more technical. If you measure economic activity on supply, services, industry, instead of measuring it with consumption and expenditure, the measurement is more volatile. Why don't you just measure it on the side of demand, even if it's too technical? Because it is also on the side of informality. The high level of informality makes it hard to measure it according to demand. You need to measure it according to supply. And this is just these were just two things I wanted to complement it with. Thank you very much, Gabriel.
Well, we have time for the last question, and that is for Gabriel. Is there a scenario or a risk that the Mexican economy is not considering, but other countries of Latin America or the world are? Which are the risks that should be considered after COVID?
Yes, the black swans. This is like a bubble. Markets. We are very bad at forecasting them. Once they went by, you were perfectly able of having forecasted them. For me, climate change is the most important one. It is called the green swan now. Climate change is the most important risk right now. Some countries take it very seriously. They carry out they have certain insurances because intensity and frequency of hurricanes and certain other natural disasters will increase. So climate change for me ranks number one, and aligned with it all the companies who really want to comply with all the TCFDs and all international frameworks to become an ESG company, environmental, social, and governance. If they are producing in a company, they want to use renewable clean energies. They want to be in a country with more gender equality. So all of these things, even the evaluation carried out by the International Monetary Fund that will be conducted next year, it will take into consideration those factors that were previously ignored. It will be important to draw investment in countries to create growth. Take this into consideration. There is a circle that I think is a virtuous circle where both financial and economic investors will be very focused on you complying with it, and the rest can benefit from complying with them. I think many countries in Latin America are not taking climate change quite as seriously and as something essential, and many other countries really are, and that will make the difference for the future. Excellent, Gabriel. Thank you very much.
And accompanied by our politics of zero emission for 2050, well, we're on the right path. Well, there's no time for any further question, but I would like to thank our for all the information that they have given to us. Personally, I found this a very interesting talk about the economic growth of Mexico and the whole region. I will keep an eye on a lot of these things. And thank you very much for everyone that has been sharing their ideas on a social network. That's why this space is for, to be collaborative.
And for the following days, you will get in your email, the one you used to register, questions related to this session. Do help us answering those questions and sharing your comments so we may take your suggestions into consideration for the next edition. And now we will go to a brief break, half an hour. We reconvene at 3 p.m. for the session of Drivers in Latin America, where Javier Bilbao, our regional CEO, will tell us about the factors driving transportation in the region. Don't miss out on it.